If you ask someone to picture a Muslim, there's a high probability they imagine one specific region, one culture, or one political identity. There is a persistent assumption that all 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide share a single unified mindset. This chart tracks global search volume, and right here at the peak, you see one of the internet's most frequently asked questions: do all Muslims think the same? Tonight, we are going to answer that question. We're stepping away from online narratives and replacing those assumptions with verifiable facts. To understand the reality, we have to look at the math. Trying to pack a quarter of the human race into one behavioral box is statistically impossible. So let's break down the numbers. This graphic shows the absolute scale of the population. There are nearly 1.8 billion people who practice Islam today. That means roughly 1 out of every 4 human beings alive is Muslim. This transcontinental map reveals that Muslims form the majority population in nearly 50 different nations, stretching from Morocco all the way to Southeast Asia. This chart highlights a major demographic reality. While the religion originated in the Middle East, Arab Muslims make up only 20% of the global faith today. This map shows the true geographic epicenter of the religion. The largest Muslim country in the world is not Saudi Arabia. It is not Iran. It is Indonesia. Looking closely at this specific region, we find an archipelago of 17,000 islands housing over 240 million Muslims. Because the mathematical center of the religion is actually Southeast Asian, the standard stereotype of a strictly Middle Eastern faith collapses. The geography alone proves the monolith is a fiction. If geography and culture don't unify 1.8 billion people, what does? The answer is a rigid, shared theological core. This diagram illustrates the 6 articles of faith. This is the intellectual framework every Muslim shares, centering on the belief in one God, alongside beliefs in angels, revealed scriptures, the prophets, the Day of Judgment, and divine decree. And this illustration shows the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the required physical acts of worship, like daily prayer, fasting, and charity, that synchronize the daily lives of Muslims across the globe. So while the theology is unified and singular, the day-to-day application functions like a massive mosaic. The beliefs are identical, but they adapt locally to the customs and languages of every continent they touch. That local adaptation naturally leads to different traditions. The most widely known division is between Sunni and Shia Muslims. This began in the 7th century as a political disagreement over who should lead the community after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, eventually evolving into distinct historical and theological traditions. This map displays the global distribution of the Sunni tradition, which accounts for 85 to 90% of the population, with heavy concentrations spanning across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And here we see the geographic concentration of Shia Muslims, who form majority populations primarily in nations like Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Bahrain. Both groups share the exact same Quran and core pillars, expressing them through different historical lenses. This diversity of thought is woven directly into Islamic history. Looking at this historical map, empires like the Abbasid, the Ottoman, and the Mughal were explicitly structured around multi-ethnic governance, allowing dozens of different religious and cultural groups to coexist under one umbrella. Today, those varying traditions thrive in completely different socio-economic realities. You will find Muslims negotiating contracts in hyper-modern skyscrapers in Dubai, and you will find Muslims farming in the mountains of Southeast Asia. The data leaves no room for the stereotype. We are looking at 1.8 billion distinct individuals, defined by their own unique cultures, histories, and political spectrums. When many people picture the Islamic world, they picture the Arab world, and they imagine it as one giant uniform block of culture. But even within the Middle East, the lived experience of the faith varies wildly. Take Cairo, Egypt. For centuries, religious culture here has been shaped by Al-Azhar, one of the oldest centers of formal Islamic scholarship on earth. Travel north to Beirut, Lebanon, and you find Islam practiced within a deeply multi-religious, cosmopolitan society, adapting alongside highly diverse political and social groups. Move west to Marrakesh, Morocco, and the aesthetic shifts again. Here, the religion carries strong Sufi influences that inform local music, traditions, and courtyard gatherings. These are all Arab Muslims. They read the same Quran, yet they experience their faith through completely different cultural, political, and social environments. This map shows the demographic center of gravity for the global Muslim population. It's not in the Middle East. It's South Asia, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, home to over 500 million Muslims. The Islamic traditions here developed their own distinct character because the population lived as a minority community alongside Hindus and Sikhs for centuries. That deep regional history dictates everyday customs. A Muslim wedding in the dense urban centers of Pakistan looks completely different from one in Cairo, and both look entirely different from a community in Dearborn, Michigan, where Arab and Islamic cultures weave into the physical fabric of the American Midwest. Despite the radical differences in languages, aesthetics, and geography, the core practices remain identical. Whether in Lahore or Detroit, they still pray facing Mecca. This graphic highlights the true epicenter of the global Muslim population. It points past Saudi Arabia and Iran, landing directly on Indonesia. Looking closely at this map of the archipelago, we see a nation of 240 million people spread across 17,000 islands. A population that massive and geographically fragmented cannot operate as a monoculture. Islam arrived here through trade, scholarship, and peaceful missionary activity. It didn't expand as a conquering empire seeking to erase the societies it encountered. As a result, indigenous customs flourished alongside the new religion. Local arts, like hand-painting intricate batik textiles, became a seamless part of its Islamic identity. Southeast Asia proves that a core faith can adopt a completely different cultural aesthetic without compromising its spiritual foundation. Africa tells a similar story of deep, localized roots. Islam has existed on the continent since the earliest days of the religion, long before many parts of Europe ever encountered it, developing entirely unique styles of mud brick architecture. This data overlay on an ancient manuscript details the scale of West African scholarship. By the 15th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu was a global academic hub, housing 180 Quranic schools and 25,000 university students. Yet African Islam is highly varied. The customs, languages, and political realities change dramatically when you move from Senegal to Somalia, or from Nigeria to Mali. Now cross the globe to Western Muslims living in America, Britain, or Australia. These communities navigate a highly specific experience, balancing traditional religious identities within modern, pluralistic democracies. Whether it's developing within the ancient university towns of West Africa or the constitutional frameworks of the West, the lived Islamic experience naturally adapts to the civic structure surrounding it. This political matrix maps Muslim-majority countries across a wide spectrum of governance. They range entirely from secular democracies and republics to strict authoritarian regimes. This graphic places Turkey on the spectrum. The nation exists in a constant ideological tug-of-war, balancing a history of secular nationalistic governance against modern Islamist-leaning political movements. This chart positions Iran at the opposite end of the scale. Operating as a state-enforced theocracy, religious doctrine legally overrules democratic pluralism. These structural differences destroy the assumption that the religion automatically generates a single, uniform political system. The reality of governance is far more complicated. If there is so much geographical, cultural, and political variance, why do so many people still view 1.8 billion Muslims as a single, uniform bloc? Much of it traces back to the media landscape following September 11th. Western news coverage exploded, but it disproportionately focused on a tiny minority of violent extremist groups. This graphic illustrates the psychological result. When you see the same narrow, conflict-driven images repeated on a loop, a global, evolving population is eventually replaced in the public imagination by a static, monolithic fiction. That media narrative actually contradicts the religion's own foundational text. The Quran explicitly frames human diversity, different peoples and tribes, as a highly intentional act of creation meant to foster understanding, not as a threat. This theology was grounded in early history. The Prophet Muhammad's original community was intentionally multicultural, drawing together Arabs, Persians, Africans, and Romans. This Pew Research chart captures the dynamic today. Looking at the top half, we see massive, unified consensus on core theological tenets. But moving to the bottom half, the numbers fracture. Interpretations and daily practices vary wildly by region. Nearly 2 billion people spanning countless cultures were never intended to think, act, or vote identically. Perhaps the real question isn't whether all Muslims think the same, but why we ever